Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. We have quite a few events, videos, and a paper on non-identity problem. But before that, I have a quick announcement to make. Antinatalist Advocacy Conference is coming back. It will happen on 29th and 30th of November this year. This is the second time this is happening. Last time it was in 2023 when there were so many interesting speakers and topics discussed. I'll put the link to that in description. This time the conference is themed around antinatalists doing good. The topics would cover aspects like actions that we could or should do, what duties we have, and how far reaching those duties are, and so on. November is still a long way to go, so we'll keep an eye on the updates as they happen. Now, on to the non identity problem. Matti, who is a well read antinatalist philosopher, commented this on one of my previous videos. Any further ramblings about the non-identity problem should be banned and all journals publishing them prosecuted. But to Matti's frustration, we have a new article in the journal Ethical Theory and Moral Practice, a non-solution to non-identity problem by Lindsey. Let's first look at what is the non-identity problem itself. Now, I'm not going to do a perfect job of explaining this, so if you really want to understand what it is in depth, I'll link two videos published 9 years ago on this topic about non-identity problem. But just for the context, imagine that there is a 14-year-old girl who wants to have a child right now. Obviously, this is bad for many reasons. It is bad for the girl herself, as this will put a strain on her own development. It might also be a burden for others who may have to support her. You might say that allowing a teenage girl to have a child is bad for the society. But most importantly, it is bad for the child itself because it will not get a good start in life. Instead, if she waits for 10 years, then at 24, she'll be more capable of providing a better start to her child. So it is intuitive to say that if that girl still insists and has a child now when she is 14, she has wronged her child. She has wronged her child because she has harmed it by giving a bad start in its life. She has harmed it because she has made it worse off than the alternative. The alternative being the scenario of waiting for 10 years. But if she had waited for 10 years, then a different child would have been born from a different sperm and a different egg. That means this child that she has now would not have come into existence at all. Now, if by being harmed, we mean that someone is made worse off than they would have been, then we cannot say that the child is harmed, because we cannot say that the child was made worse off than it would have been, because in the alternative scenario, the child would not have been at all. Therefore, we have to conclude that the 14-year-old girl did not harm the child by having it now, and therefore did not wrong the child. This is in complete contradiction to our intuition, and that is the crux of the problem. We think this is wrong, but we can't tell why it is wrong. Lindsey provides her own interpretation of the problem in terms of the obligations that we have to our children. We recognize that we have obligations to our future children that we ought to be prepared to meet. But it's mysterious how we could wrong a future person by failing to meet our obligations to them, when that person will only come into existence if one fails to meet those obligations. Now, there are solutions proposed to this problem. One is to think of the child as any child, whoever that child may be. So we are not tied to the genetic identity of the child. We can say that whoever fits the role of the child of that girl is at a disadvantage by being brought into existence now rather than after 10 years. In technical terms, this is called de dicto sense, that whoever that child may be. Other solutions include impersonal view, that is thinking about different worlds. In one world, the 14-year-old girl gives birth to a child, and in another she does not, and then compare those two worlds to decide which one is better. Another approach is to deny that harming someone means making them worse off. In this paper, Lindsey makes a case that for wronging someone, you don't have to harm them. Not only that, but we don't even have to think about whether the child was harmed or not. Lindsey refers to Immanuel Kant's framework of ethics. According to this view, a person has intrinsic value. That means a person should not be viewed as a means. Person should always be treated as ends in themselves. So a person's existence has unconditioned or absolute worth, but that does not mean that we should maximize it by creating more persons. The value of person here is regulative, meaning it puts regulation on our behavior. If I think that your life is valuable in and of itself, irrespective of whether it is of any use to others or not, then I'm constrained from reducing it by, say, killing you. The intrinsic value of persons puts constraints on how we interact with them. Broadly, we don't use them as means and treat them as ends in themselves. Okay, so that was about existence existing persons. But in what way can a person who does not yet exist put any constraints on us, which is the case of procreation? Lindsey says this confusion arises because we are thinking of the end result, that is, a child in its physical form. We are still focusing on the consequence rather than the procreator's intentions. The seeming problem in applying Kant's moral theory to procreation only arises if we assume that the source of our directed duty is the patient to whom it is owed, and then conclude that we can't be constrained until that person exists. Patient here means moral patient, that is, a child that we are thinking of having. The subject of my duty, considered as a physical object, a human organism with a determinate genetic identity, isn't the ground of my duty. The ground of my duty is my own conception of someone as a person, which has its source, the moral law within me. In deciding whether the 14-year-old girl is right or wrong, she does not have to wait until she actually has a child. What matters is what her intentions are. That intention gives meaning to her actions. And when persons intentionally procreate, their offspring aren't just the effect of those procreators' actions, they are also procreators' productive end. So the decision to have a child in itself is a subject to moral scrutiny. You need to understand all the obligations you are committing to having and raising a child, and you must also be capable of fulfilling those obligations. What happens to the child later on is a mere consequence, but the decision that you take to have the child is what matters morally. To demonstrate this, Lindsey tweaks the non-identity problem. Imagine that the 14-year-old girl goes ahead to have that child now, and just by luck, a rich family member steps in to ensure that the child is properly cared for. The child gets a good start in its life, good education, nutrition, mental support, etc. But even this situation, which turns out to be good for the child, does not now absolve her failure to appropriately consider what she owes her offspring. That's why Lindsey says her moral mistake is independent from her child's ultimate well-being. So the girl was wrong from the moment she decided to have a child at such a young age, and it was wrong irrespective of how that child's welfare actually came to be. It does not matter if the child was actually harmed or made worse off than any comparative alternative, and therefore it avoids the non-identity problem altogether. That's why the title, A Non-Solution to Non-Identity Problem. Lindsey says the account of procreation that I have offered here is not a solution to Parfit's non-identity problem. It's an argument that if we start from within Kantian's moral framework, then non-identity problem doesn't arise for morally responsive procreators. And as a corollary, Lindsey even includes accidental pregnancies. In such cases, the decision to get pregnant was not made, that happened accidentally, but the decision to continue that pregnancy is still subject to moral scrutiny. Persons may have a moral obligation to take steps to avoid or end an accidental pregnancy when they are not also willing or prepared to take on the extended activity of person creation. In fact, this can be applied to anyone who has contributed to creation of a new person. It doesn't matter whether you are donating sperm or an egg, acting as a surrogate, gestating a fetus to put up for adoption, or adopting a child, you are explicitly contributing to creation of a person. You are all implicated in this. Matti, Häyry, yeah, that's him again, was interviewed by The Mirror on the recent IVF clinic bombing. He said an antinatalist can hold justifiable views, but putting these actions into real life is unjustifiable. The views people hold and the actions they take are connected, but not in deterministic ways. For example, someone with socialist views might vote Labour. That action is justifiable. If the same person were to plant a bomb near the headquarters of a political party they oppose, that would be unjustifiable. The same principle applies to other ideologies. An antinatalist can reasonably argue that reproduction is ethically problematic. That's a view. Voicing it in public is justifiable. Planting a bomb near IVF clinic, an institution associated with reproduction, is not. The real danger lies not in ideologies like antinatalism, socialism, or liberalism as such, but in the acceptance or encouragement of violence within a given culture. The line we must insist on is simple. Holding and expressing unpopular or radical views peacefully is justifiable. Resorting to violence is not. The IVF clinic bombing is still making some news. New York Times published the Fringe movement referring to this event. It featured David Benatar saying, "You're stuck between having been born, which was a harm, but also not being able to end the harm by taking your own life, because that is another kind of harm." What was surprising though was it had a quote from Peter Singer about antinatalism saying, "I don't know any other philosophers who share it." It is surprising because there's Matti, Häyry, there's Julio Cabrera, Karima Kerma, Gerald Harrison, Patricia McCormack, and even Masahiro Morioka, the non-antinatalist philosopher who has written so much on this subject. There was a short but surprising article on a website called Religion News titled, "I am not an antinatalist, but as a rabbi, I do get where they are coming from." So Rabbi Avi Shafran is at least willing to consider why antinatalists are antinatalists. On the way, he refers to debates of two Jewish scholars, Hillel and Shammai. These two schools argued for 2.5 years on whether it would have been better for humankind not to have been created or whether its creation was for the best, before concluding that man would have been better off left uncreated. Hillel and Shammai were ancient scholars, but the article also mentions a more contemporary scholar, Lawrence Anton. If you follow this channel, you would already know Nimrod. He does outreaches continuously throughout the year, talking mostly about antinatalism. He had done European tour in various cities in the past with his antinatalist placards and signs. The news is Nimrod is coming back. He would be doing a short tour in Europe starting at the end of June and for most of the July. The trip will be divided into two parts. The first part will start with the Munich Pride Parade on Saturday, June 28th and end with the Cologne Pride Parade on Sunday, July 6th. The second part will likely cover the Frankfurt Pride Parade and the Berlin Pride Parade at the end of July. Things are still under planning and we will know more in the coming days. We saw Negative Utilitarian Society's outreach in Poland last week. They are organizing more outreaches this time in Germany. On 7th and 8th of June, they will be in Leipzig from 12 noon to 6 p.m. and again on 20th and 21st of June. There is also another outreach by them on 21st June in Munich. From Germany to Japan, there was one outreach event in Japan by the group Antinatalism Japan, which I think is led by Asagi Hozumi. On your screen are the placards used in the outreach as depicted on the website an-japan.org. The next one will be on June 22nd at Ikebukuro Station in Tokyo. From Japan to Turkey, there was a long and detailed presentation about antinatalism in Turkish by Taner Bater on YouTube channel Iki Ateist. So it's mainly a channel on atheism. The talk included many aspects of antinatalism from philosophy to psychology and from humans to non-humans. I know this from the auto-translated subtitles, but if you know Turkish, then you would enjoy this even more. And then we had this video in Hindi by Siddharth Dafaria. It's only a 5-minute long video, but he covers many different topics about antinatalism, consent argument, the suffering, axiological asymmetry, risk argument, right to die, and so on. From Hindi to French, we have so many languages this time. There was a French podcast about freeing yourself from your family. It was an interview of Sophie Galabru, who is an associate professor and doctor of philosophy. The podcast itself is in French, but the translated description tells that most of the discussion was around structures of family and the ways of raising children. But there were also some references to David Benatar, antinatalism, and the consent argument. So if you happen to know French, please let me know what was actually said. Link will be in the description. And finally, we come back to English video by Lawrence talking to Dr. Birgitta Wahlberg, who has drafted a proposal on the fundamental rights of animals in Finland. She teaches law in Finland and specializes in legal rights for animals. Lawrence and Birgitta discuss mainly about legislation and laws about animals and their breeding, but there were some interactions into moral aspects of caring for animals and breeding them. Overall, a very good discussion to listen to. Those were the stories for antinatalism this week. Thanks for watching.